Hello everyone. In the last video, we saw how we can combine multiple Excel files from a folder in just a few clicks. In this video, I want to take you behind the scene and show you exactly how that happens. Now do keep in mind, for most basic users, you don't really have to know or learn all these things, but I feel differently. I feel that Power Query is only going to get more important over time. And it's best to at least have a little bit of understanding of the advanced side of it as well, so that whenever it is required for you to upskill yourself, you are not starting from zero. You already have a little bit of understanding. Let's have a look. Now, if you look at the left side, we have something called the helper queries. And on the right side, we have the applied steps. Let's look at the helper queries first. Now in helper queries, the first option that you see is a parameter. The parameter, everyone, is nothing but a user input. That means the parameter 1 essentially is going to ask the user to choose which one of all the files in the folder will be the sample file. Now in the second step, you notice that we are actually selecting 2011, which is our sample file. If you remember from the previous video, we had told Power Query to decide automatically which one should be the sample file. So it ended up choosing the first file, which is 2011. Now let's look at the applied steps. So you notice that there are two steps here, source and navigation. The source is fairly easy to understand. It says folder.files, and then we have the path of our folder. What you see right now, everyone, is the M language, what we use in Power Query. By chance, if the formula bar is not visible, you can always go to View and you can enable or disable the formula bar from here, like this. Most likely, it should be enabled for you and you should always keep it enabled. By chance, if it is not enabled, you can enable it like this. So in the first step, we went to the source and we picked up all the files from there. And in the second step, which is the navigation, we are saying source 0 content. That means we are only taking the first file as the sample file. Now, obviously, if you change the 0 to 1, now you notice it will pick up the second file. And if you change it back to 0, it will pick the first file in that folder, like this. Now we are writing a function because you can see there is an fx button here. Now you will not be able to see much in this window, but if I go to advanced editor, click on OK, you will see that there are a few steps that have been created here. They're very simple to understand. First, we have our source, which is parameter 1. That means this is where we as a user decided which one of the files should be the sample file. So that became our source. Now from the Excel workbook, we want to select the sheet that we want, isn't it? So then we said that the sheet that we want is a sheet and the name of the sheet is called sales. And then finally we pick up the data from that sheet. The data would be all the columns and all the rows in it. And then finally we are also promoting the header. Now, why is this important? Because remember in Excel, we don't have headers. We only have column A, B, C, D, E. But in Power BI, we do have headers. So how do we explain to Power Query that the headers have to be picked up from the first row in the Excel file? That is why we are promoting the headers. Now, where is the result of this function? You will notice in the last step, it says transform sample file. And you will notice here we have all the data, but only from one file, which is the first one. So you notice here, we only selected 2011. So this is the data only for 2011. You will also see that the headers have been promoted. So the row ID, order date, all of this has become the header in our data. Now this is great. We have managed to get all the data from one of the files. But then what about the other files in the folder? Now we come to sales historical, that is other queries. Now here you notice there are some applied steps that have been created on the right side. Let's have a look. The first step says that what is the source? Now the source is folder.files. The second step says that what type of file do we want to pick? Do we want to pick the hidden files as well from the folder? We don't. That is why the step says that if at all there are any hidden files in the folder, it will not pick it up. Now, right now you notice the columns that we have are extension, date accessed, modified, created, attributes, and the final column is folder path. But now we are invoking a custom function. So you notice a new function gets added called transform file. Now I hope you can see where this transform file is coming from. It is actually coming from here. So this function that we created, transform file, is actually coming here, and it is now being applied on all the three files that we have. In fact, if you click on this expand button, you can see that it is also able to pick up all the content from all the three files. Let me cancel this. Now, if we go back to the name, which is the name of the file, we would like to rename that into source name. That is why the next step says table.rename columns, and we are changing the name column into the source.name. Now there are only two things we're interested in. We want to know the source name, and at the end we want to know the content. Everything else that we have right now is not needed. That is why in the next step we are only selecting two columns. One is the source name and the other is the transform file. Now of course we want to expand the transform file. So now we say expanded table column. Now the final step is that each of these columns has ABC1 to 3 written on it, which means that the data type is undefined. So right now Power Query does not know whether this is a number or a date or a whole number or something else. Now either you go column by column and you fix it, or you can let Power Query do it for you. So you notice that in the final step, it is automatically detecting the most appropriate data type for each of the columns. So you notice that for each of the columns, it is assigning the most appropriate data type, and the final result comes like this. Please watch this video a few more times if required. Remember that in your actual work, most likely you will never have to go through all these steps. So this is a little behind the scene, meant only for very advanced users, but I still wanted you to get a feel for how Power Query works, because you might need it someday.